Got it. Welcome, Toastmasters and guests, to another edition of Storytelling Spectacular. And thank you for Larry for organizing this as part of his Distinguished Toastmaster project. We have 6 speakers tonight, and I have determined the order. Number 1, Larry. Number 2, Linda. Number 3, Eileen. Number 4, Matthew. Number 5, Roxanne. Number 6, Brad. Any objections? Good. We will start out with Larry. Larry is a professional storyteller and author. He was a scoutmaster for several years. He's running a book on scouting and the hilarious times that the boys had. This is one embellished story of an extraterrestrial event. Please welcome Larry Crack.
Thank you, Mr. MC Toastmaster. There were 3 of us, predominant 3 of us. There was, I think I've mentioned to these 2 boys before. Mo, he is the short guy with the glasses, the Einstein. He's the brains of the group. And he has this really low voice. You know, all short guys have low voices, right? And then there was Curly. He was tall and he was getting his height. And his voice was crackling, just like a teenage boy's crackle. And then there was me, and I'm right in the middle. One day, I get a call from Mo. You got to come over. I have discovered an experiment, and it is really, really cool. All right, Mo's coming too. Come in the evening. So we all got together in the evening in his backyard, and here he has laid out all over the yard 3 laundry bags, and inside of them is taped a cross member of balsa wood, and on top of them are several tea candles. You know, the ones that are in little aluminum cups. He says, "Look at this, isn't it cool?" And Curly goes, "What is it?" I says, "They're Japanese lanterns. Aren't they so cool?" "Yeah, but how do they work?" So he explained it. And so what we did is hold up the bags, and he lit the first set of tea candles in that first bag. Now these bags had big polka dots on them. And on the one side of it says cha-ching, rinse and ring. And they came from the Chinese laundromat in town, right on the Main Street corner. So after the tea candles burned a while, pretty soon, yes, it ballooned up nicely. And it kind of raised off the ground. Mo says, "They won't go very high. They only go about 5 feet. Don't worry." So he turned around and started the other ones. And Curly says, let's do 2 of them at a time. So we did 2 of them at a time. We got those burning, and I was holding one and Curly was holding another, and we got them. So they were just barely floating. Then we turned around to Mo's, looked around. It was gone. It was nowhere to be found. And something caught the corner of my eye, and I looked up. It was like 50 feet up in the air already. I says, "Mo, you said it only go 5 feet. It's way up there over the trees." Oh, Mo couldn't figure out. "Oh, I sure didn't know it'd go that high." So we turned around to make sure the other 2 hadn't got, but it's too late. They're up 10 feet. We jumped and jumped and jumped. And even though Curly was the tallest, he couldn't grab it. And up they floated. up into the evening sky. And they were starting to go towards town. So we got on our bicycles and we pedaled and kept underneath of them and watched them as they floated closer and closer to the middle of town. And oh, they made a sight. They were really interesting. They, with those polka dots on them, they were really, really interesting. Well, we got to the main intersection in town, and there was the stoplight there. One was red on one side on Main Street, and First Street, it was yellow. So that was blinking, 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 blinking all night long, all day long. And underneath of it, right in the middle of the intersection, was a car, and this car had all kinds of contraptions, antennas on it, you name it, in on the side, and it was stalled. And outside of it, next to it, was Dwayne Delusion. He was the village paranormal expert, and he ran around in his aluminum cap with antennas. See, and he is looking up there, and he has the spectrometer, and it was, and another in one hand and another disc in the other hand, and he's trying to communicate with these guys. He says, beam me up, take me to your leader, or I'll take you to our leader. I'll be the spokesman. Oh, and then we rode up, and he says, do you see this? My car, it just stalled out right in the middle of the intersection when those spacecraft came across. And sure enough, the blinking light was kind of going, and even the street lights were just kind of flickering. It was really, really, you could feel electricity in the air. Oh yeah, us, the teenage Three Stooges imaginations, we were really going too. And so just about that time, we hear a siren off in the distance, and it gets louder and louder and louder. It wasn't one siren, it was about 5 or 6 sirens, and around the corner comes Bully, the town cop. And he had lights everywhere. You say the extraterrestrial UFOs, they have lights on them. Well, his looked like a terrestrial UFO rolling down lights everywhere. He'd make a fantastic space cadet, which he was anyway. He comes up there, and he jumps out of his car, and he has this tactical belt with hundreds of things on it. He staggers up. What's going on, Dwayne? What are you doing in the middle of the road? Oh, Dwayne says, do you see what's up there? Look it up there. Hey, UFOs, 3 of them. They're gonna go right across town. They're gonna attack us. I don't know. Oh, Dwayne says, I'll take over from here. He pulls out his Glock and he points and he said, come on down, or I'll shoot holes in your spacecraft. Dwayne goes, no, don't do that. You'll get them mad, and they'll zap you, and you'll turn into just a pile of ash. Oh, Dwayne, Bully, he kind of calmed down after that. He said, I'll take over from here. You get back, get behind me. And he's hollering at those things and raising a ruckus, and out comes Cha-Ching from his laundromat. He's wondering what the commotion is going on. He looks out and he looks up in the sky and he goes, hi, oh no, they're my laundry bags. And he recognized his own laundry bags. He runs back in his store, he slams the door, pulls down the shades, and last thing he heard, they're gonna take me to prison, and I'll rot in prison. I didn't do it. Well, the laundry bags, they kind of floated over his building, and they kind of disappeared, and we all ran around the back, and there was a wooded lot. It was vacant wooded lot, and we could see them just kind of, the candles kind of flicker out, down, down, down they came into that wooded lot. And pretty soon, flames came out of the trees. Oh no! Of course, Dwayne DeLucio, and he said, "They've landed! They've landed! They're gonna take over! They take over!" And from the other side of town comes another set of sirens, and along comes Flint Forza in his big, bright red, shiny fire engine. He gets out and he says, "Get back, guys, I'm in charge now." So he gets his fire extinguisher out and he charges into the woods, and the rest of us charge in behind him. And Dwayne DeLusion, he has a Geiger counter and it's going beep, 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 beep. And they get into the middle of the woods there, and it's fuzzy, you can hardly see through the clouds and the smoke. And Flint sees the fire and he puts out the fire, and then he's looking down on the ground, and down on the ground there's all these, everything was burned up, 3 big splotches of burned splotch. Let me get back in focus here. These UFOs, they just kind of do that to the zoom stuff. And he gets there, and the only thing left is those little aluminum cups. The wax is all burned out of them and everything like that. And Flint, he picks one up and he looks at it. And of course, Dwayne DeLusion, he's getting excited. He says, "Stay away, they're radioactive." And he puts his Geiger counter over there and it's going. Well, Flint dropped it, but Dwayne, you're crazy. Picks up it again. He says, "This looks familiar. I know my wife has had something like that." Well, Curly, he knows he's been had. So Curly goes, "I think my mom's calling. You hear my mom's calling?" Boom, he's out of there. Of course, Mo, he gets the idea too. "Yeah, my mom's calling too." And away he goes, and I don't want to be in charge of it. And I says, "My mom's calling too." And out of the woods I went, streaking like crazy, got on my bicycle and went all the way home. And that was the night of the UFO. Back to you, Mr. MC.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, our next speaker is Linda Pius. Linda joined Toastmasters about 7 years ago and is on the presentation mastery pathway. She's used personal stories mostly within speeches to convey messages or as examples. This is the first time she's telling a story with no hidden agenda. The story of the Princess Savitri is one of the best known and best loved tales of India. It appears within the Mahabharata, India's great national epic, which can be compared to the Old Testament. Now we'll welcome Linda Pius with The Princess and the God. The Princess and the God, Linda Pius.
Thank you. Once upon a time, there lived a king with many wives, but no children. So he often prayed at an altar in front of his palace, wanting a child. 2 years later, a goddess appeared at the altar and said, "I am Savitri. I am so pleased by your prayers all these years, and you will be getting a child soon. Don't worry." And sure enough, a few months later, the king got a beautiful baby girl with his favorite wife, and he named her Savitri after the goddess Savitri. Now, Savitri grew into a beautiful, brilliant young lady, and it was time to get her married off to someone. But no one in the kingdom seemed to consider himself worthy enough to be this beautiful lady's husband. Because no one came forward, the king said to Savitri, "Why don't you go out into the kingdom and find a man you like, and I'll arrange the marriage for you." And so Savitri set out with 2 of her maids and traveled far and wide across the kingdom. She stayed at ashrams, which are like Hindu monasteries. And during one of those stays, she was talking with the chief teacher of the ashram, and a man entered the room. And there was an older guy following right behind. And she asked the teacher, "Who is that man?" And he said, "Oh, that is Satyavan. He is actually helping his father. The father used to be a king, but now he has lost his kingdom and his sight. So Satyavan, being a good, honest man, just like his name suggests, is taking care of the father." Savitri stayed there for a couple more days, got to know a little more about Satyavan, and was ready to go back to her palace. Now, the day she reached the palace, it so happened that the king was holding court with a holy seer named Narada. Narada could see into the future to an extent. So Savitri said to the king in front of Narada, "I finally found the man I want to marry. His name is Satyavan." "No! No," Narada said. "Please, princess, I cannot think of any person more worthy of being your husband, but I know his future. He has only one more year to live." That was a shock. But Savitri had found no better man in her travels. So she said, "Even if it's only for a year, I want to marry only Satyavan." Okay, the king agreed, and he set off to meet Satyavan and his father. Now, Satyavan was overjoyed to get such a beautiful girl as his bride. His father had some concerns. He wondered how a princess could stay at an ashram, which is pretty humble setup compared to a palace. But Savitri and her father assured him that even if she did take some things for granted, she is not the very pompous type. She can easily adjust after a while. And so the marriage took place, and Savitri began to live with Satyavan and his father. They lived happily for a year almost. And then Savitri began to get anxious because she knew Satyavan would be dying in a year. So 3 days before the death date, Savitri started praying and fasting. On the third day, she saw Satyavan going out of the house with an axe. And she asked him, "Where are you going?" He said, "Oh, we are out of firewood. I just need to go into the forest." And she said, "I'm coming with you." "Oh, please. Why don't you have some food and take some rest? You've been praying and fasting for God knows what." Because Savitri hadn't told him about his death on that day. So Savitri did not want to leave him alone in the forest. And she said, "I am coming with you. I'm not leaving you alone." And so they went off together into the forest. After chopping wood for a while, Satyavan said, "Oh, my head's starting to hurt." And Savitri began to feel concerned that this may be the beginning of the end. And Satyavan said, "Oh, let me sit down for a while. I'm not really feeling well at all." And Satyavan sat down, kind of closed his eyes. And Savitri sat next to him. And she noticed his breathing was becoming slower and his body seemed to be burning up. As his breathing slowed almost to a standstill, she heard footsteps. And she looked up and saw a very princely man striding towards her. He had a dark red cape that almost matched his red eyes. And even if his face was coal black, it shone. And he said to the princess, "I am Yama, god of death. You are able to see me only because of all your prayers and fasting. I am taking Satyavan to the land of the dead. He will be happy there because he was a very good man on earth." Saying that, he took a piece of thread or something like that, made a sort of noose out of it, passed it through Satyavan's chest, and drew out a tiny likeness of him. Savitri knew that is his soul, that this god is now walking away with. She couldn't leave him like that. She followed. After the god had walked a bit, he heard footsteps behind him, and he turned around and he saw Savitri. What are you doing? You cannot come with me to the land of the dead. And she said, but I don't want to leave my husband. You cannot ask for your husband's life back, said the god. But Savitri said, but I really don't want to be away. And he said, okay, how about I grant you one wish? What do you want? And Savitri said, can you get my father-in-law his kingdom and his sight back? Okay, I will do that, the god said. Now, please don't follow me. And he took off, walking along a river bank. The river bank had very thorny bushes, which didn't bother the god at all. But Savitri was following again, and the thorns tore at her skin and clothes. Ah! She made a sound. And of course, the god heard her. Yes, Savitri, what are you still doing? I told you you cannot ask for your husband's life back. And she said, you said Satyavan would be happy, but what about my happiness? You're taking my happiness away from me. He said again, I know, I'm sorry, but can I grant you one more wish? Will that make you go away? And she said, okay, would you grant my father more children? And he said, of course, yes. Now you have to stop following me. But Savitri did not stop following. This time, the god went up a hill. The hill was not at all a difficult thing for the god, but for Savitri, who was following yet again, it was quite a tough hill. She was clambering on all fours. And by the time she reached near the top, she was huffing, puffing, and of course, loud enough for the god to hear. He turned around and said, Savitri, I told you not to follow. Why are you still coming behind me? And she said, I really don't want to be without my husband. And he said, you can ask for anything other than your husband's life. And she said, okay, then grant me more kids and let them all be Satyavan's kids. Okay. She did not directly ask for his life, but to grant her wish, he had to return his life. So he said, okay, you are as clever as you are persistent. Why don't you go back to the forest where I found you, and he'll be waiting for you. Thank you so much, said Savitri, and she went back. As she got closer to Satyavan, he was opening his eyes and was wondering, how long was I sleeping? And as Savitri got closer, he looked at her face and asked, why are you smiling and crying at the same time? But Savitri didn't stop to explain all that had happened. She said, let's just go back home. And then they went home. Years passed. Satyavan's father got his sight and his kingdom back. Savitri's father had more children. In due course, Savitri and Satyavan became the king and queen, and they had more children. And decades later, when the god of death came for them again, they had no fears or tears. Thank you. Gary, you're muted.
All right, thank you very much, Linda. That's something I have not heard before. Hindu mythology.
Yeah.
All right. Our next speaker is Eileen Beck. Eileen Beck has lived in Washington State for most of her life. She was born in Yakima.
Oh,
Eileen always likes a good story, especially if it is backed with a little history. This evening's story takes us back to the 1950s. It's about bending the rules and the Ten Commandments. Eileen Beck, the future is up in the air. You're on.
all right, thank you. Honor your father and mother. Alice slammed that Bible shut. It says honor your father and mother. It says nothing about obeying them. I think I'm going to steal a car. Alice should have read the seventh commandment, but that's something else. Let me give you a little thing on Alice here. She's a high school dropout, and her family is about to be evicted from their farm and house. So before you judge her, just remember she was growing up in the 1950s. Her father contracted polio, which was rather odd because usually children got polio, not too many adults did. But he was so sick, he was in the hospital in Portsville, 100 miles away, and he was in an iron lung because he couldn't breathe well. Now, when she dropped out of school, she helped on the farm along with her brothers and her mother, and paying the mortgage off wasn't the big deal. It was the hospital bills. They wanted to keep her dad alive, and they wanted the best for him. So mortgage and hospital bills, they couldn't keep up. The mortgage usually suffered. Now, there was this kind of cantankerous bank manager. His name was Conrad Post. And he said, if you do not pay this next mortgage, I'm taking everything away from you. Well, that didn't seem fair. The nice thing, though, that Alice and her mother remembered, they did have a little plot of land that was they never used, they kind of forgot about. So they managed to sell it to a really nice older man who had retired who wanted to put a cabin on it. And they were getting the wheeling and dealing done, but then Mr. Conrad Post said, hey, it says right here that when you have signed everything, the man of the house or the real owner has to do the final signature. Nothing else is accepted. Well, Dad's in the hospital. Can't accept that. If he's still alive, he has to be the one who signs all this. Now think of it, Conrad Post, his nickname was Con. So that tells you right there, he was one con man. Well, they got everything signed and we got the land sold, and Alice had the papers in her hands, but she needed to get to her father 100 miles away. That's why she needed to steal that car. Her mom had the family car, and her mom was off talking to a lawyer trying to, save the farm. Her brothers had the truck. They were doing odd jobs to bring more money in. There wasn't a car in sight that she could even steal. Plus, she didn't have her driver's license. Then she thought, hey, there's Sid. He's at the airport. He always goes and sees his girlfriend on weekends. I'll hitch a ride because that's where his girlfriend lives, right at Portsville, where the hospital is. So she runs to the airfield, and no one's there. She sees Sid's car. And this is kind of weird because usually around 5 o'clock later, he'd be taken off to see the girlfriend. But she noticed that there's keys in the car. So, aha, this is a chance to steal the car. She gets in there, turns the keys, and nothing happens. She goes out and pops up the hood. Well, the battery's gone. And she remembered, he was having problems with that battery, and he special ordered one. So I don't know, where is he? Did he hitch a ride with someone to go to Portsville? She really didn't know. So she was looking around, and she thought, she was at the airfield, and there were crop dusters. There were old World War II airplanes. They were just nice little airplanes that were easy to fly. And she said, I wish I could jump in one of these airplanes and just drive down the highway to Portsville. That'd solve a lot of problems. That'd still be stealing, but hey, solve a problem there. And then she thought, well, hey, wait a minute. Why can't I just fly one to Portsville? And really, Alice could. Think about it. She liked visiting Sid. Sid was a great guy, and she wasn't so much into being a pilot, but she just loved flying in the air. It seems like she just could cast off her worries and just everything was beautiful up there. And after a while, because she kind of snuck on the plane with Sid without her mother knowing, and Sid even taught her how to keep the plane steady while in the air. So she knew how to keep an airplane up there. And then there's another person that was rather helpful in all this. Her name was Josie Myers, or really Lieutenant Josie Myers. She was part of the Women's Air Corps. She flew all types of airplanes from one point to the other in the United States during World War II. And she had battered airplanes. She had some good airplanes. She had big airplanes she had to fly. She could do any of that. And after World War II, there wasn't a demand for women pilots, but she still missed it. So she came to the airfield quite a bit. And she loved the fact that what's her name? Alice loved flying. So, and she loved teaching. So each time Alice was with her, she taught Alice how to taxi down the runway, how to get that nose up, and how to ascend into the air. She even taught her how to land it. So Alice was thinking, no, even though someone's always been with me, I've gotten up to the air, I've stayed there, and I have landed all by myself. But in some ways, I won't have anyone there with me. It's always good to have two people when you're kind of in something like this. She thought about it, but she thought, I've got to get up there. I got to get these papers to my dad. So she finds this nice little airplane, and it was rather easy to fly, especially in good weather. And she saw that the windsock was not doing too much. It was just sitting there. So she said, I'm going to give it a try. So it takes a little adjustment. The one good thing about this one little airplane, she was with Sid when he was getting it ready for a customer this coming Monday. So she knew it had gas. It was ready to go. There weren't any problems with it. All right, so she gets in it, and it takes a bit. You got to turn it on, you got to turn it around, and you got to position it right at that airstrip. And she was sitting there, and she had to take a deep breath. She had to make a decision. Am I going up, or am I staying here? Are we going to lose our farm, or could this piece of paper my dad signed save the farm? She had to think about it, but she finally got the nerve, and she started taxiing down the airstrip. And she says, I've never remembered this being so bumpy before. And really, the airstrip wasn't bumpy. She was just so nervous. She was just bumping along in her seat. So everything else was smooth. And then she did it. Now, I don't know much about airplanes myself, but you push the right buttons, you get that nose up, and you accelerate, and up you go in the air. And she did. And she did it pretty well, fortunately, even though she was shaky. And once she was in the air, she always remembered them saying, once you're in the air, that's no problem. It's going up and landing. They're the two problems. Well, she got half the problem taken care of. And she was up. She knew how to turn. She had a great sense of direction. So she was on her way to Portsville. And as she was flying along, feeling quite proud of herself, something she didn't think about hit her mind. Where the heck am I going to land? There are no airfields in Portsville, no airports, which was good because you have to have a license to fly into an airport, and she didn't have that. But there's just no place to land, she didn't think. Oh, this is horrible. I'm up. It's hard landing, but it's even harder staying up in the air for the next 12 hours, too. So what she was thinking. And then she remembered that Portsville wanted to get rid of all their old schools, and they're going to put their grade school, their junior high, and their high school all in this one area. They cleared out all the trees, leveled the hills, and they started putting the tennis court in because these were sports fans. They want to make sure that tennis court was in there and the football field. Those were all laid out, but that was about it. So that's great. And then when she's flying in, she sees that clearing. But she had to remember, she had to hit either the tennis court or the football field, because otherwise she'd be hitting really loose gravel. So once again, and she's a pretty smart kid, and she still had good eyes. She got in there and she hit the tennis court at first, maybe did a little damage, but no one's going to know any different, and then hit the good old football field. She was feeling pretty good about herself, but the football field was running out and she was going into the trees. So she kind of slammed on the brakes, plane jiggled a little. Fortunately, none of the wings hit any of the trees. And it was kind of nice because the plane was a bit hidden. It was kind of weird if someone found an airplane on their football field. Well, she was in there, and so she starts running. It's about 2 miles to this hospital. So she's running, and it's exhausting, and she's still shaking. And sometimes she just wants to give it all up and just start crying. She doesn't know what she wants. But she's running, and she's almost to the hospital, which is on a big hill. So she's, oh, I got to run up this hill. So she almost starts up there, and all of a sudden she hears her name. Alice, is that you? She goes, oh, her heart was in her head. She was hearing things. She starts running up the hill. Alice, that is you. What are you doing here? She turns around, and there was Sid. Well, did he know that she stole that airplane? And she doesn't think so because that'd been too quick. And how did he get here anyway? Sid says, I see you're here at the hospital. Is your father okay? Yeah, my dad's okay. It's all right. He just needs to sign these papers. And he said, oh, that's great. Now, how did you get here? Well, she decided to deflect that question back to him and said to him, how did you get here? I see that your car was still at the airfield. It was, oh, I took a Greyhound bus here. But when I got here, my parents went to Seattle. They aren't around. My girlfriend decided not to come this weekend. I was so bored, I decided to take a walk. And it's so boring here. Do you mind if I hitch a ride back with you? Oh, well, yeah, hitch a ride back in your stolen plane. I guess you could. But she didn't say that to him. She goes, well, yeah, maybe so. Stick around. Because she thought, even if Sid was really mad at her, it'd be much better if he flew back with her than her going back solo again, especially in the middle of the night. She goes, stick around. I'll be in the hospital for about a half hour or so. And we'll kind of make arrangements to get back. Oh, she wasn't too sure what she was going to tell Sid, but off she went. So she bolted in the front door and she went right to that elevator, hit the 7th floor, and then she felt an icy grip on her shoulder. Miss, what are you doing? She turned around and there was that receptionist. No one liked her. She made rules and she expected everyone to follow them. She was always on some power trip. Well, Alice says, I'm here to see my dad. Yeah, the receptionist says, visiting hours are over. Alice says, well, hey, it's 6 o'clock. The receptionist said, I decided to cut visiting hours because they were working too hard. She had some lame reason why she decided to make a rule that visiting hours were now 6. Well, Alice was getting upset. Once again, she kind of wanted to just either burst in tears or just slug that receptionist right in the mouth. She was so anxious there. Well, there were 2 nurses walking down and they could hear Alice arguing with the receptionist. One was named Jill and the other was named Sandy. Now, Jill took care of Alice's father and she kind of knew Alice. So Jill said, what's going on here? And the receptionist said, well, this young lady thinks she can see her father and she cannot. Well, Jill says, why not? She doesn't see her father that much. It's just for a few minutes. The receptionist says, nope, I made the rules. And if you try to sneak her up there, I'll tell the supervisor. Oh, well, Jill knew no one really wanted to be told on by the supervisor. She was just as bad as the receptionist. So Jill and Sandy said, come on, Alice, let's go to the cafeteria and have the Portsville Memorial Hospital macaroni and cheese casserole, and we'll talk about your dad. How about that? Well, they kind of winked at her. So Alice thought, okay, let's go. So she's walking by with the receptionist looking at them, but the receptionist decides to go away, and Jill says to her, we can get you upstairs. Don't worry about it. There's a stairwell that no one uses it. We can sneak you up there. So they got Alice up the stairs. They looked around to make sure the supervisor wasn't any wiser to him, and they got her right into her dad's room. Now, he's in an iron lung, and this is something way in the past, but he's lying down in a tube. And what happens is it helped push the carbon dioxide out, and then a release, and so the person could breathe the air in. They didn't have real respirators back in those days, and you had to stay in those. Plus, if you had polio, you were rather paralyzed, so you really couldn't do too much anyway. But he was kind of living in a cage. So Alice goes in there, and she said to her dad, I got some papers to sign. And he says, well, that's great. I heard that they were going to be signed this afternoon, but you sure got here quick. How did you get here? Did you fly? Well, maybe I did, Dad, but you don't worry about that. You need to sign these papers. And Alice says, can't they get you out of this? Sit you in the chair so you can sign it? And her dad says, I can't. My arms are paralyzed. And it's really hard for them to get me in the chair anyway. So she said, well, how are you going to sign this? Mr. Con Post will only take it if your signature's on it. And her dad says, well, see that little gadget right there? She goes, yeah. It looked like a deflated ball. He says, well, pick that up, and there's a little opening. Put the pen in there, and then put it in my mouth. So she put it in his mouth, and he goes, and then she had to take it back out of his mouth, and he said, now get a clipboard and put the papers on it, and I will sign it. And Alice says, well, this can't be your legal signature. He goes, well, it's my legal signature now, and I signed it, and it's binding. Mr. Con Post can't get after us. So she got the pen, put the device in his mouth, and he signed the papers. Well, that was a big relief to Alice. And she would have loved, and everything kind of fell in place. She kind of noticed how sick her dad looked, and that kind of really made her sad, even though she was so happy she got these papers signed. So, she stayed with him just a bit. And then when she felt that her dad was getting tired, or maybe the supervisor might be getting too close, she singled the other two nurses, and they got her down the stairwell. And of course, as they were walking out the door by the receptionist, they go, how did you like that macaroni and cheese? And Alice said it was the best. Of course, they didn't have any, but the receptionist didn't have to know that. And out Alice went, right outside. She felt lightheaded. She couldn't believe all the things she had done. Previously, she kind of was heavy-hearted. She was a high school dropout. None of her friends would come and see her. Her dad was so sick they might lose the farm. And now she was kind of feeling light as a feather. Even though she was a high school dropout, she could think of some clever things to do. Plus, she actually flew a plane. She never believed that she did that. And she felt, if there's a problem, I can solve it. I can fix it up. Nothing's impossible anymore. And she kind of felt, yeah, nothing's impossible. Maybe my dad will get better. Maybe the farm will get better. Maybe I'll return to school. She felt great. And then she saw Sid coming up the stairs. And she goes, well, it's not all over yet. I got to tell Sid about this stolen airplane. So there they went. He says, it's time to go. Do you mind if can I still hitch a ride with you? And she goes, yep. And he goes, who did you come over with? And she says, it's a big surprise. You promise not to get mad at me. So he says, no, I promise not to get mad at you. And so off they went to the high school, which was the future home of the pirates. Mr. Toastmaster.
All right, thank you, Eileen. And now for our next speaker, Matthew Hartman. Shadows in the Dark is a work in progress prequel story intended to feed into a larger science fiction world called Curie. The people of Curie have no idea that certain events will change their lives forever. Listen to the first steps in a wider world. Matthew Hartman, Shadows in the Dark. Matthew, you're on.
Thank you very much. The winds blew heavily as the man rode along sand dunes. As far as the man could see, there was only sand, sand, and more sand. It was barren wasteland where only the bravest or idiotic were dead. His goggles glinted in the light, despite the efforts of his wide-brimmed hat to block out the sunlight. The man wore a black long coat, blue shirt, and trousers. Beneath his hat was red hair, which matched his neatly trimmed red beard. Behind his goggles were brilliant green eyes. He sat atop a spotted brown nag. The trader promised that the horse was among the best. But the man wasn't so sure about that after so many miles on the road with the old nag. The old nag proved to be stubborn, but content to try to eat any shrub she could find along the way to their destination. The man sighed as the sun beat down on man and horse alike as they slowly continued along. I never should have trusted anyone in that damn saloon, the man thought as he wondered if there was even anything out there. Despite his skepticism, Jack Ryder was always on the lookout for the next opportunity. He had grown up hearing stories about Zarn City and was never quite sure what to make of it, having never been there. Zarn was said to be the one beacon of civilization in a swath of fertile land in an otherwise unforgiving world. The people in the capital could never understand what it was like for people like him. Well, they enjoyed fancy lives thanks to modern technological wonders. People in the outlands lived a rugged life in an unforgiving desert. The desert covered the western half of the continent in what had once been a lush paradise generations ago. To be fair, the eastern region that encompassed the majority of the existing kingdoms was comfortable enough. But comfort made people complacent with what they possessed. However, Jack was anything but complacent. Jack grew up in one of the shanty towns on the outer limit of the Kingdom of Zarn. Growing up in such a place meant that everyone had to do their part to make sure the community kept running. Still, he wondered how a bunch of people with hubris could have ruined the world so badly. He didn't know anything about what had actually happened beyond stories of the hubris of man in thinking he could control destiny itself. And frankly, he didn't care. Whatever the people of the Kyrian Empire had actually done to mess things up had made life difficult for everyone else. Besides, he couldn't see how anyone could have ever lived out here in this wasteland. Aside from the occasional shanty, the farther you traveled from one of the handful of major cities on the continent, the more dangerous the environment became. He sighed and pressed the damn nag to stop chomping on the paltry shrub and keep going. How could he have ended up with such a stubborn horse? I bet that guy knew this horse was stubborn. Asked for a discount, get the worst horse in the world. Jack grumbled to himself before taking a swig of water from the canteen. He had a vague idea of where he was going. There were rumors of a possible dig site somewhere in the vicinity, and he just needed to keep moving forward. What he did wasn't strictly legal, but it was lucrative. Discovered ruins from the Kyrian Empire were regularly guarded by local militias. Rather than send guards abroad, the government hired locals to protect the researchers at any given site. Too bad the researchers just wanted to put any relics they found in museums instead of trying to see if any worked. It was true that most of the relics of the past were irreparably broken, but every once in a while, a working piece of Magitech was uncovered that reintroduced one of the comforts of the ancient empire back into the world. Jack passed tumbleweeds and cacti in what was an otherwise barren landscape. It was a long ride on the stubborn nag, but he knew that if he could reach an untapped ruin, that there could be fortune in his future. Better be worth it though, because is the sun killing me? Jack wiped sweat from his eyes as he continued the ride along. For a moment, he thought he heard the sound of galloping. He blinked and glanced around his surroundings. In the distance, he saw what had to be a dozen men in the red outfits of the Red Riders militia. One thing was for sure, they weren't friendly. Friendly folk don't brandish rifles at you. Jack urged the nag to go faster. At first, the nag barely moved any quicker than before. That was until a shot rang out. That got the stubborn horse to move. "Hey, stop!" yelled one of the horsemen. No, getting captured by the Red Riders and being detained for a month or worse was not on the agenda today. Knowing that he had crossed into a red zone was enough for him to realize he was on the right path. The riders chased Jack across the barren desert dunes. It had been years since the Red Riders had caught wind of him. The last time he had came across them, they nearly captured him. Being captured by the Red Riders wasn't something he found killing. If they didn't outright kill you right away, they had a nasty habit of hanging trespassers on wooden posts on the border to the territory as a warning for those who traveled into the territory without a writ of passage. Officially, they only hung repeat offenders, but the Red Riders were known to sometimes skip the vetting process when they were in a hurry to go back to their main outpost to turn in for the night. True, he could have applied for a writ of passage. But the confines of paperwork and rules never appealed to him. Making a profit was much more appealing. He glanced back for a moment and saw his foes closing in on him. He needed to take action, or things were about to get dicey. The nag coursed along towards a canyon that Jack saw in the distance. He pulled an oar from his belt and turned it a notch just as he entered the mouth of the canyon. Jack tossed the orb and it hit the ground. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the orb flashed white and the mouth of the canyon collapsed behind him, blocking the entrance with rubble. Jack heard shouts of frustration as he continued onward through the canyon. There was no turning back now. The canyon grew more narrow, and overgrown with foliage as Jack continued along the way. He gave a sigh of relief as he noticed an odd-looking wall. At first glance, the wall looked like the rest of the stony passageway, but a faint shimmer caught his eye. He stopped and dismounted the horse to examine it. At first glance, the wall seemed to be just another wall of solid rock, but he recognized faint Korean runes that suggested something else. There was a depression in the wall, but no apparent key. He tapped into the various runes in the depression, but nothing happened. He frowned, unsure of what to do next. Naturally, the nag began to nip at the weeds growing by the wall. "Of course you would be hungry," he said. Jack shook his head as the horse continued to eat. That's when he spotted an odd-shaped rock that had been covered by the grass. The horse was eating. He picked up the rock and pressed it into the depression. There was a click. The rock wall rumbled and moved to reveal an opening. Jack stepped inside, finding a dark room. At first, nothing happened, but a light flickered and soon he could see an untouched structure. The walls were made of metal and the floor was concrete. Flickering lights that had not been turned on in centuries revealed sealed metal boxes neatly arranged as if waiting for someone to pick them up who had forgotten about them. The room was obviously from the Old Kyrian Empire, and by some miracle hadn't been looted in the past 1,000 years. Jack didn't know it yet, but the decision to explore this room would change his life forever, all because his discount horse was hungry. He walked further into the room and found himself in a hallway filled with twists and turns. Jack passed doorways that were still shut with no apparent way to open them. As he walked, lights above clicked on, lighting the way forward. His foot bumped a curious device. It was small and rectangular. Curious, Jack picked up and examined it. After some effort, he opened the rectangle to reveal a broken screen and keyboard. Disappointed that his find was busted, Jack set the rug gently back on the floor. Jack crossed the threshold into a large room full of dilapidated chairs and tables. A glint on the wall caught Jack's attention. Jack brushed his fingers across a dusty touchpad and hesitated for only a moment before he placed his palm on the touchpad to see what would happen. The glint on the wall flickered as the screen came alive with text written in the old language of the Kyrians. Jack frowned as he thought back to his lessons years ago on the old language that was now mostly spoken in the dusty services held by the Church of Lumera, or used in writing academic tomes that, while more interesting than services, were still time-consuming in translating back into the common for your average Zarnian. Despite his roguish figure, Jack was a learned man, having been expelled from the academy for an incident involving a cow on top of the bell tower. Jack smiled at the memory, especially the part where the headmaster shouted in fury as moos rang out from above. The academy could remove him, but they couldn't remove the knowledge he gained during his 3 years there. Jack read the message. Warning, network error. Local network access active. Extranet down. He tapped away at the buttons to see if anything happened. The screen blinked and went to a menu. Jack read through the list of options before spotting an option for inventory. He tapped it and smiled. Although some of the words were unfamiliar to him, he gazed at the list with wonder. It was time for Jack to meet his destiny. What he found wouldn't just change his life. His findings would change the people of the planet Curie forever. This path would one day lead to a different man's journey across Curie to discover forbidden truths. But that is a tale for another day. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Matthew. Our next speaker is Roxanne Strutz. Roxanne is a dog groomer by day and a Toastmaster by night. She practices storytelling on the dogs at work. In addition to on some of us Toastmasters. But the dogs, they won't talk back. They'll just bark. So let's listen to her story tonight. Roxanne Strutz, The Invasion. Roxanne Strutz.
Hello. The story that I'm telling tonight is a children's story about an invasion that did not happen very long ago. It was in Area 43, and we were invaded by space aliens. Gather around, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what happened. A young child named Paul lived in a town very close to Area 43. It's a highly guarded, restricted area. Life in the town where Paul lived was normal, not very busy. But Paul is the hero of this story. He was an inquisitive child. He would look up, watching the sky and watching the clouds go through the sky. At night, he would lie on his back in the garden, mesmerized by the stars. Too many stars to count. There must be more than 12, he thought. He would stare at the sky by day and by night, which would make him very curious. Why is the sky blue during the day and why is it dark at night? Where does the moon go during the day? Where's the sun go at night? And where do the stars go? When Paul was in school, he would spend an awful lot of time staring out the window, watching the clouds as they flew along the sky. And he one day asked his teacher, "Is there life out there?" And the teacher, not wanting to frighten the child, said, "No, we are the only beings in all of the universe." But she knew full well that Area Had 43 had evidence of outer space aliens and had recovered a spaceship. Meanwhile, long, long way away in another galaxy, there was another set of beings living, and they were the meanest. They were the orneriest. They were the ugliest beings, and that were about as pleasant as a very hungry polar bear. In their world, they were as big as elephants, and they had very sharp teeth and fangs, and they had the disposition of a very mad, wet hen. The planet was a dismal place to live. It had 10 moons, and it had 3 suns, and it rained every single day. Big, gloppy rain that was very slimy and thick and cold as snow. Then the suns would come out, all 3 of them, and they would turn this rain into goo. The food was slimy, and it made the inhabitants have terrible, stinky breath. And they didn't even like each other. They were too mean. Then their feet were like flippers, and their hands, all 4 of them, were like pinchers. The nearby planet's inhabitants called them the Galopians, from the planet of Glop. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with any of them. The Galopian king had said to a commander, "We will find a new planet to invade, a better place to live. Build a spaceship." They built a huge spaceship, slippery, slimy spaceship, and they boarded their armies into it. When the spaceship was ready, they tried to lift it off the ground from the sun-dried rain turned to goo. With great effort, it was finally launched. Then, without looking back, they went off into the vast universe. Now, life on the spaceship wasn't any better than what it was on Glop. They still had terrible, stinky breath. They were crowded, which did not make their naturally ornery disposition any worse, any better either. The commander decided to take advantage of this. "Troops, exercise every single day. Learn to growl and wrestle hard." And the troops got bigger and stronger and meaner. Now, the Galopians could find no place at all to live, and it was nothing suitable, so they kept going where no Galopian had ever gone before. Now, one day, the commander spotted a strange planet way out there, and it was like anything he had never seen before. A bright reflection of blue way off in the distance. "Helmsman, lay a course. We will invade and take over that strange place. Troops, exercise twice a day. Wrestle harder. Sharpen your teeth. Learn to growl deeper, harder." Now, the blue planet appeared larger and larger and larger over the months of travel. Then it came time to take over the strange place. At first, the spaceship tried to land, tried to get into the atmosphere, and it bounced off. "Try it again." When they finally got in, and they finally got through the barrier, the spaceship was sped through the sky, trying to find a place to land and start the invasion. They landed very close to Area 43. Now, on that day in the village, Paul had arrived home from school as was usual, went out into the garden to do his homework. As he was sitting there and reading his book, he heard what sounded like a huge bumblebee come past his glasses, almost knocking them off, and plop, something landed on his book. He looked down at it. The moment that the spaceship landed on his book, the commander gave charge, and they started coming out of the spaceship. They froze. They looked up at these bewildered eyes looking down at them, and these big eyes up there. Then they heard what sounded like a thunderous, horrible sound of his mother calling him in for dinner, and the even louder sounds of Paul answering, "I'm coming." Now, Paul, being the obedient child that he is, closed his book with a loud snap and went in the house. There was no invasion that day. MC?
Hi, thank you, Roxanne. Our final speaker is Brad Grinrod. When you've driven a semi-truck across country for as many years as Brad, you'll see a lot of strange things that just can't be explained away. The next story is a true account of one of them. Please welcome Brad Grinrod.
Thank you, Gary. This past summer, it was reported, and the Pentagon for the first time confirmed that leaked photos and video of UFOs taken by Navy pilots off the coast of San Diego were indeed authentic, reigniting the argument of what ufologists claim the government has known all along, that the flying saucer crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947 and the alien abduction of Travis Walton from Snowflake, Arizona in 1975 were not a hoax, thus emboldening beleaguered true believers into finally coming out of the closet. So, although I've never admitted it until now, I too have a story to tell, which for no reason other than that a story deserves a title I call Exit at 322. It was a pitch black desert night, an hour and a half east of Phoenix. We were pulling the Marana Rise before the easy glide down to Tucson. My co-driver, Chris Johnson, who grew up around these parts, was checking out the map. Exit 322, he said. We can fuel the rig up there before going on to El Paso. He looked at his watch. Should be there by sunrise. There, at exit 322, on Arizona's Interstate 10, literally in the middle of nowhere, sits a lonely Shell gas station and fuel stop that features a Dairy Queen, a souvenir shop, and 3 brightly painted tin sheds that house one of the most curious roadside attractions in America. It's called The Thing, Mystery of the Desert. And for years, I'd seen billboards on the side of the interstate advertising The Thing as I drove my 18-wheeler across this vast, empty stretch of Southwest desert. And each time I'd say to myself, one of these days, I'm going to stop and see what this thing is all about. But for one reason or another, I put it off until one night, under mysterious circumstances. Chris, I looked over at my co-driver. Have I ever told you about the time that I decided to actually pay the $1 they charged to go in and see the thing? It was right here, pulling the Marana Rise, pitch black like tonight, when up ahead, at the top of the hill, I began to perceive a sort of, a diffuse halo of light. So that up along the crest up there, I could just make out the silhouettes of the saguaro cacti. You know how their arms bend up 90 degrees at the elbow? So I swear they were waving at me. Freaked me out. Hang on a minute. The engine was bogging down a bit, so I dropped her into a lower gear just before we reached the top of the hill. That's better. Now, where was I? Oh, yeah, I'll tell you another thing that freaked me out. Where'd that light come from? There ain't nothing out here. Yet there it was, floating like some alien spacecraft. Until just as I got to the top of the hill, there appeared a sign that said, "The Thing, exit 322, 89 miles." Now, if you've ever traveled along Interstate 10 between Phoenix and El Paso, then you've seen the billboards advertising The Thing. You can't miss them. There's a billboard every mile for 247 miles. And I'll bet there's at least 100,000 cars and trucks that pass by The Thing at exit 322 every day. Or maybe it's closer to 200,000 or 300,000 that pass by, but don't stop. And for years, I was one of them, an unbeliever. Oh, sure, I'd seen the signs, all 247 of them, hundreds of times. The Thing, mystery of the desert. The Thing, seeing is believing. The Thing, are you a true believer? But never once considered stopping until that night, pulling the Marana Rise and seeing that strange hovering light. Something deep down inside told me it was a sign. So as night turned to morning, I continued telling the story to my partner, Chris. I pulled the rig up into the Shell station at the top of exit 322, asked the fuel attendant where I could find The Thing, then walked across the graveled lot and opened the front door. "Good morning, sir," smiled a young server behind the Dairy Queen counter. I tipped my hat, but without comment continued on my pilgrimage into the souvenir shop, skirting glass cases displaying Navajo dream catchers and stuffed desert roadrunners and Southwest Indian rugs for sale, half off. But I hardly noticed, and without so much as a sideways glance, moved past the souvenirs straight to the museum ticket counter and paid my $1. "Enjoy your tour, sir," the cashier said. Then I parted the curtains and stepped into a corrugated tin shed, the first of 3, which housed a 1921 Graham Page truck, Graham Page being the largest truck manufacturer of its day. Further on was a perfectly preserved 1848 Conestoga wagon. After that, a 1937 powder blue Rolls Royce, purportedly once owned by Adolf Hitler. And like the Fuhrer, was a little worse for wear these days. The second adjoining shed held more priceless artifacts. Among them, a 1654 Spanish matchlock rifle found in the dungeon of a Constantinople castle. The only one like it in the world, the sign said. Don't touch, it's beyond price. But I hardly noticed. Because at long last, upon reading billboard after billboard after billboard out there on the highway, all 247 of the darn things, I now stood at the entrance to the third shed, the object of my haunting directly in front of me. So I stepped across the threshold. And as I did, was overcome with the pervading dread that in so doing I had violated some sacred seal, thus incurring the native curse dispensed upon unbelievers who in their hubris laughingly regard this mystic mausoleum, where in the center stood a 3-foot high, 5-foot long cinder block carapace, upon which rested an ancient sarcophagus sealed with a glass lid. So I walked over and peered inside to behold the mummified remains of the thing, purported to be over 100,000 years old, the sign said. You've seen it, Chris. I probed my partner. So what do you think? Is the thing real? Well, I can't say for sure, Chris mumbled in his Southwest drawl. Some say it's a hoax. Yeah, I shot back. That's what they said about Travis Walton. It was a hoax after he was abducted by aliens up there in Snowflake, barely 150 miles from here. And what about that saucer crash in Roswell? It's a known fact they're still hiding the frozen bodies of the alien crew there. You know, Chris, there's a lot of unexplained things happen out here in this desert. And what about the Navajo Star people? Why, they still tell those legends like they happened yesterday. No, I wouldn't be too quick to write the thing off as a hoax. And to this day, I haven't. As there's still that unexplained light I saw at the crest of the Marana Rise, and the feeling deep down that it was a sign.
All right, thank you, Brad. Well, thank you to all our speakers and to all who watched intently and listened. Thank you all for coming.